In the year 20X5, a Galactic Federation research vessel is breached by space pirates on a mission to steal samples of a feared parasitic life form known as Metroids. After tracking the pirates to planet Zebes, the Federation mounts a failed assault on them and are ultimately forced to leave without the highly dangerous Metroid samples. With no other options and the fate of the galaxy in the balance, the Galactic Federation dispatches the mysterious and dreaded bounty hunter Samus Aran with the task of finding the Metroid samples, defeating the space pirates' leader, Mother Brain, and destroying their lair.
You gonna have to use passwords? Call me when you guys get battery saves. God.
Released in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System before being localized for the US a year later, Metroid is an 8-bit side-scrolling adventure game for the NES. Developed by Nintendo's R&D 1 team in collaboration with Intelligent Systems, the game follows bounty hunter Samus Aran on a planet-trekking journey to find and eliminate the dreaded Mother Brain, before she can use the stolen Metroids mentioned in the cold open to presumably usurp the Galactic Federation. Now, I've always had a soft spot for the Metroid franchise. In fact, the original Metroid is actually one of the first games that I've ever played, thanks to my parents who owned it on the NES. As I mentioned way back in my Karate Kid NES review, my mom actually had an NES back before I was born and would obsessively play Super Mario Bros. On it. My dad, curious about video games himself, ended up buying several NES titles that were mostly sports or card-based affairs. But among the few action games he did end up buying at the time was the original Metroid. And wouldn't you know it, he hated it. Although I don't blame my dad for hating it. You see, he's really more of an amateur gamer at best and only really likes stuff like Galaga or Galaxian, so throwing him into an open-ended adventure with very little guidance just is a bad idea in general. Anyway, at the time of its release, the original Metroid received some pretty rave reviews, with players and critics alike complimenting the title for its vast and expansive world, the secrets held within it, and the then and somehow still subversive inclusion of a female protagonist. And yeah, before a few of you start typing a comment about how painfully obvious and over-reported this is, I know this isn't really news to a lot of us, but it's kinda hard not to at least acknowledge it. And that's all I really plan to and am honestly qualified to do here. Acknowledge it as culturally significant and state that it's just pretty awesome. I especially appreciate how hidden this was from players back in the day, as the game only reveals Samus's true identity after you've gotten one of its good endings. Heck, the original manual even refers to Samus as a straight-up male cyborg with a true form that's shrouded in mystery, setting players up to find out that Samus was a woman all along.
What? What? No! What?
But does it hold up? Because rave reviews, spawning a popular franchise that's loaded with great games, and featuring one of the most iconic video game characters of all time is one thing, but managing to remain fresh and playable 35 years later is another feat entirely. And while I have a lot of love and affection for this game, that doesn't mean that I'm blind to its many faults or the fact that most players these days have seemingly unanimously decided that it doesn't hold up. Before we continue though, a quick question of the day. What is your favorite TV show or movie that's based on a video game? While some of you may assume that my choice has to do with Sonic the Hedgehog, I'd actually have to go with either the Super Mario Bros. Super Show or Kirby Right Back At Ya. I have a ton of memories of waking up on Saturday mornings to watch the Kirby cartoon over on 4Kids TV, and I also have great memories of catching a few episodes of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show on a DVD I got out of a cereal box, as well as on YouTube and Netflix once I got a bit older. Feel free to tell me a bit about your favorite game to TV or movie adaptation over in the comments. I'd love to hear a bit about your answer. And with that out of the way, on with the video. Metroid takes place on planet Zebes, which is separated into 3 distinct areas. These areas are named Brinstar, Norfair, and Turian respectively. There are also hideouts for the game's two bosses, Kraid and Ridley, as well as a number of hidden power-ups and energy/missile tanks to help soup up Samus's arsenal for her journey.
Have you been juicing? A little vibranium cocktail?
While many of the power-ups found in the game are required for progression, one of the things that I've always loved about the original Metroid is how hands-off and generally laissez-faire the game is about the order in which you go about collecting them. Outside of collecting the Morph Ball at the start of the game, you can really go about picking up items at your own discretion. That bit of non-linearity, while heavily iterated on and improved in subsequent entries to the series, proves to be Metroid's biggest draw for myself and numerous other players around the world. Simply put, it's really fun to run around Zebes and strip the planet for parts to find upgrades for Samus's power suit. And you'll really need all the power-ups you can get, especially for the last area in the game, which is populated by the titular Metroids and are best disposed of with a combination of the Ice Beam and missiles. Oh, and nervously rolling around in the Morph Ball while they literally try to eat your brains. Although, it does kinda make me wonder what all these power-ups are doing here to begin with. Like, I get that other Metroid games would elaborate on this somewhat, but I can't help but ask why Mother Brain and the Space Pirates never did anything about all the Chozo statues with power-ups or the straight-up live ammunition that was laying all over the place. It also makes me wonder whether or not they even knew that Samus was on the planet and that she was loading up like freaking Schwarzenegger on a warpath. Anyway, when it works, the open-ended and maze-like structure of Metroid is a glory to behold, and the opening area of Brinstar shows how fun it could be to traverse and navigate an alien world. The only problem is, this kinda starts to fall apart once you navigate to some of the other areas on the planet due to the game lacking a built-in map. In fact, this is actually one of the chief complaints held against the game by modern players, as without a map of some kind to help you chart your journey, a lot of the rooms start to blend together due to a lot of copy and pasted level design. But, and this is purely personal preference before anyone gets mad, I kinda like the lack of a map here. This could just be because I've gotten used to it from playing the game so much over the years, but there's something quaint and even charming about how the game doesn't guide you as much as other Metroidvanias would go on to. And perhaps I'm just romanticizing things here, but the idea of charting your progress through a physical map that you need to draw out yourself sounds really immersive and like it would encourage players to roleplay their way through the game in ways that you simply can't on more modern titles. That's not to say that you can't beat Metroid without a map though. It just means that it'll probably make for a more tedious and frustrating experience should you decide to. And even with the map, you're still in for at least some tedium, as another thing that makes traversing the map difficult is the lack of any clear indication of hidden passageways in later parts of the game. This is especially weird because the game goes out of its way to tell you that the floor of certain areas can be destroyed with a bomb as early as in the second screen of the game, but then expects you to figure out which areas are hidden behind unmarked barriers for the rest of the adventure. While not that bad and something that you quickly grow numb to after a while, it's a far cry from how later entries in the genre would handle things. I totally get hiding optional passages or power-ups behind this kind of level design, but hiding an area you need to access through something like this feels kinda cheap and unfair to the player. As for the moment-to-moment gameplay in Metroid, it's all pretty good outside of a few flaws. Samus moves at a pretty decent speed, and killing enemies feels fun enough, even if you're often woefully outnumbered and cornered by them. The game strikes a pretty decent balance of making Samus feel overwhelmed by the creatures surrounding her, while also making her feel powerful due to all the upgrades you can find as she slowly becomes a Swiss Army knife of alien exterminating goodness. An expectoid gadgoid, if you will. And while it's a serious shame that you can't crouch or fire diagonally in this first game, it's not that hard to get used to, nor is it necessary once you've picked up the bomb power-up or gotten the screw attack. However, that doesn't excuse how outright grindy the combat can get. Upon spawning in a new game or after you've died, Samus is stuck with a measly 30 health, and in order to recover your lost HP, you'll need to cozy up in an area with an endlessly respawning horde of enemies in it in order to grind for energy. This isn't really helped by the amount of health that enemies can take away from you in a single blow, and it's probably the worst part of the game for me because it feels more like a punishment for trying to play the game as opposed to a simple nudge of encouragement for you to continue your adventure. Plus, it totally breaks the pace of the game itself and encourages players to approach Metroid in a slower or more cautious fashion. Which really sucks because I genuinely believe that Metroid is a game best played aggressively. Nothing honestly feels better than zipping across the planet and mowing down hordes upon hordes of enemies like you're Buzz Lightyear on the hunt for Zurg. And while nowhere near as fast-paced as something like Contra or that other Konami game where you rush and attack, I believe it's called Green Beret, it's a really thrilling way to approach the game. Being an NES game, the original Metroid also falls victim to your usual slew of 8-bit issues. The game flickers, it slows down whenever there are more than a few enemies on screen, and the fairly limited NES controller leads to some frustrating controls due to all the switching between missiles and your standard beam that you'll be doing. Oh, and the game also features a very long-winded password system as opposed to battery saves in every region that it came out in, except for Japan. While each of these issues and limitations are relatively par for the course on the NES and aren't that bad with the proper context of the hardware in mind, it does make for a somewhat impaired experience. Assuming you're playing this on an actual NES, that is. Thanks to modern technology though, we can actually fix each of these issues with little to no effort. The game's slowdown and flicker can easily be worked around on something like RetroArch, and we can also fix the aggravating use of the select button to toggle missiles by remapping the select button to something like X or Y on a modern controller. Oh, and the password system? You can just spam save states to your heart's content. Even the game's grindier moments can be improved somewhat on the right emulator, thanks to being able to speed up the game and cut those grinding sessions in half in the process. Honestly, with a few of those quality of life improvements on your side, the original Metroid is a fairly breezy experience. And even without these quality of life improvements, there's no denying that the original Metroid's appeal is well intact after all these years despite its shortcomings. Simply put, it's just really fun to play, and it's really fun to defeat Mother Brain. While very limited by the 8-bit hardware it's running on, the original Metroid manages to provide a dazzling and otherworldly environment for the player to explore. Each of the game's different areas are color-coded to stand out from each other, and all have distinct enemy designs within each of them. This makes trekking between the game's several areas feel like a journey across several different ecosystems, as well as accomplishes the task of giving the game a relatively varied identity. Frankly, Metroid is full of personality. For example, despite Samus's fairly small and straightforward sprite, the game is able to tell you a few things about the various power-ups that you have available to you. It's a small detail for sure, but I love how Samus's cannon goes from green to cyan when you're using missiles, as well as how her suit itself changes color once you've found the Various suit. Later games would expand on this greatly thanks to adding larger and more detailed sprites to the game, but the original Metroid makes good use of what's available to it. And while I could go on about how I wish the game featured more animation or larger and more detailed sprites like what's available on some Metroid ROM hacks, I personally find what's on display here to be extremely charming and more than adequate for the introduction to the series. Plus, while a lot of people have probably expressed discontent for how tiny the game's bosses are in comparison to later iterations of those same characters, I don't know man, I think Chibi Ridley and Kraid are kinda cute. The overall sparseness of the world is actually a part of its charm for me, such as how the game's backgrounds are always a black void. While it's a pretty common practice in NES games to feature a black background, I think it kinda adds to the ambience of the game here and makes Zebes feel like the desolate and lonely planet that it is. Composed by Hirokazu Tanaka, the soundtrack is filled with iconic themes and jingles that are appropriately heroic and unnerving when they need to be. The game's music has been referenced in subsequent titles in the series, as well as in Super Smash Bros., and it's one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. It's honestly kinda hard to describe the appeal of Metroid's music, as a lot of it is fairly low-key and can even get pretty ambient at points. In the grand scheme of things though, the fact that Metroid's music is this low-key was actually a fairly big moment in the history of gaming, as at the time, music for video games typically served the purpose of operating more like fanfare to an adventure than something that underscored a journey. And yeah, Metroid has its share of fanfare too, such as in the excellent Brinstar theme, but that quickly falls to the wayside once you start to venture deeper into Zebes. Playing through Metroid late at night and having the various bleeps and bloops of the soundtrack accompany you just hits different, I guess. Even the more ambient and atonal music, such as the theme for Norfair, manages to add a certain je ne sais quoi to the journey that's better experienced than it is explained. And for fans of the game's soundtrack that have never checked out the Famicom version of the game, well, do I have a surprise for you. Because the game was released for the Famicom Disk System and not on a standard cartridge, Metroid's Japanese OST is actually in higher quality and has a different mix that frankly blows the NES version out of the water. Like seriously, at the risk of sounding like that vinyl snob we all know that swears by his mono mixes of Beatles albums over just streaming the stereo versions, let's call him Retro Drew?
Hey!
The difference between the two is night and day. So does Metroid hold up? Kinda. Not really, but yeah, kinda. While the game received great reviews back in the day and spawned one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, Samus's inaugural adventure proves to be a fairly rocky time. And while I believe it's aged a lot better than I think a lot of us give it credit for, it's still a bit rough around the edges and offers little incentive to revisit outside of the novelty of it being the first Metroid game. However, as I said earlier in the review, a lot of the game's issues are fairly easy to overlook, can be worked through via emulation, or have 35 years later almost become a part of the game's unique charm. Simply put, if you're planning on revisiting the original Metroid, you'd probably be better off revisiting its much beloved remake Metroid Zero Mission, or playing through this one on an emulator for a few quality of life improvements. Still, it'll always have a special place in my heart, and will probably remain a game that I revisit every year or two. There's just something really inviting about its relatively short length, the nostalgic memories it brings up for me, and watching the patriarchy self-destruct whenever I beat it.
What?
And with that said and done, that brings us to the end of today's video. Feel free to leave an answer to the question of the day over in the comments, or drop a line with a review request for a future video. You can also hit me up on Twitter or Instagram by following @NichePlays on those respective sites, or by following the link over in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and that if you decide to check out Metroid for the first time, or you just happen to replay it because Metroid Dread's coming out soon, that you have a great time doing so. So yeah. Bye.